Because of how poorly humans have treated the environment, much of the Earth is currently underwater in the year 2063. There are now just 2 continents, and they are at war with one another over territory and resources. There is a military station called the Sentinel with a staff of 4 soldiers who are beginning to become impatient in the middle of the ocean separating both continents. Their 2-year contract came to an end 3 months ago, but the relief crew has still not arrived to take them up. Food is becoming scarce, so Cassidy and Sullivan decide to attempt fishing on an extremely stormy night. Unexpectedly, they succeed and make a lot of captures in their large net. As the storm intensifies, their commanding commander Hendricks orders Baines to secure the massive bomb that protects the Sentinel. The waves start to get bigger and more ferocious at that point, disrupting the pipes in the outpost. In his haste to mend them, Baines gets his hand trapped, which forces him to battle underwater for several minutes before succeeding in breaking free. The two lose their catch when the waves outside sweep the net away. Sullivan attempts to grab something once again, but he has to quickly retreat inside before being dragged away as well since the wind is becoming too powerful and hazardous. Everyone returns just in time for the massive wave to strike the building, shaking it and forcing water into every door. Nevertheless, when it's through, the Sentinel is still standing. The following morning, while eating breakfast consisting of military rations, the party discusses how to use less resources. When Baines learns they lost the fish, he becomes upset and wonders what happened to them. In response, Sullivan insults Baines for stealing components from his kitchen to fix the main pipes. Hendricks asks them to focus on the repairs and tells them to act like adults as an argument breaks out. Baines questions why they don't beg for aid to arrive quickly, but Hendricks explains that the telegraph is just for reporting. Sullivan then uses the telegraph to complete the daily report. When he notifies the base that there have been no occurrences, they respond that this has been the case for the past several months as well. Later, Sullivan comes outside to meet Hendricks, and after making some jokes about their air dancer, Sullivan uses the binoculars to look at the water. When Cassidy examines the radar, she verifies his alarm at the approaching spacecraft. Hendricks is skeptical and asks Baines to bring some guns in case it's the enemy, which makes Sullivan nervous because he assumes it's the relief. Hendricks decides to give the spacecraft a chance when Cassidy attempts to contact it but receives no response. In addition to giving Sullivan a rifle, he instructs him to take the boat to the ship and make sure there are no adversaries to be concerned about. Sullivan gets out right after and makes his way to the ship, calling out to any potential passengers but getting no response. Sullivan boarded the ship with his rifle ready and starts looking everywhere, becoming increasingly furious as he discovers the evidence. The radio is broken, there is untouched food in the cabinets, and everything is coated in filth. Hendricks tries to get in touch with him to ask about the situation, but Sullivan dismisses him when he discovers 4 bags that belonged to them. They had been relieved, but something occurred to the crew, and they vanished, so they lost the opportunity to return home. Hendricks believes Sullivan was attacked because he isn't answering, therefore he wants to kill the spacecraft before it gets close to the Sentinel. When Cassidy hesitates, he tells her that she must comply with protocol before asking for one of the explosives keys. Hendricks triggers the explosives detonation using his own key, and just before firing, he makes one more attempt to reach Sullivan. Sullivan answers this time, which is a blessing since the onslaught is stopped. Cassidy requests for her key back, but Hendricks tells her he's keeping them as retribution for her unwillingness to carry out her orders. Sullivan tows the ship to the Sentinel after that. In order to make up for the terror they just had, Sullivan and Cassidy spend a short, while becoming flirtatious as Hendricks investigates the ship. After a short iodine bath a few hours later, Baines updates the group on what he was able to retrieve from the ship. Additionally, he is certain that the engine hasn't run in months and that this was a relief. Even though this qualifies as an event, Hendricks prevents Sullivan from communicating with the base until they have further details since nothing about it makes sense. The crew is growing weary of Hendricks' attitude and afraid of him, especially now that they see he has both keys. Hendricks examines the ship's navigation history after getting out of the shower and records all the coordinates, which he then takes back to the Sentinel and uses to plot their route on a chart. Since they haven't seen the outside world in 2 years, Cassidy and Sullivan speculate on how it must be. They will get an answer tomorrow, according to Sullivan, who acknowledges sending a message behind Hendricks' back. The following morning, Hendricks discovers his 3 troops waiting suspiciously at the telegraph, and Baines admits the truth. Hendricks is about to reprimand them for it when the machine responds before he can. As they read that it is exactly the same message that Sullivan sent last night, the gang loses its excitement. They eventually come to the realization that they have been receiving the daily, no events, notification from Sullivan's computer, and that they had lost touch with the base a long time ago. Baines starts creeping onto the ship with a strategy in mind while Hendricks continues to work with the locations on the chart. One evening, Sullivan sees him returning, but Baines won't explain. The two eventually take a drink, and Baines tells anecdotes of his family back home, assuming that it is still there. Baines suddenly admits that he believes he can repair the ship. Sullivan hurries to tell Cassidy the news and offers to take her with him to live in one of the few remaining safe towns on the continent, but Cassidy is reluctant and won't accept what she's hearing. Sullivan is excited by the prospect of leaving. The following day, Sullivan sneaks onto the ship with Baines to assist him in fixing the engine, and the two of them successfully complete the task. Hendricks is waiting for them as they exit, and he instructs them to disassemble the spacecraft so they may utilize its components to repair the Sentinel. He won't let them go because he says they must remain here even if their contract has expired. Baines concurs with Sullivan's refusal to perish here as it did to others in the past, but Cassidy doesn't exhibit support for them when she joins them. Hendricks ignores their disagreements and orders the team to begin the repairs, threatening to use his rifle if they don't comply. Cassidy offers to speak with Hendricks next since the men are enraged and concerned that he has been acting too trigger-happy recently. When Hendricks loses his final squad, Cassidy tells him that she knows how he feels, but that leaving doesn't mean you're going to die. If anything, it's a form of rescue. Sullivan and Baines are beginning to worry if they may need to confront their employer in order to acquire what they want in the meantime. Hendricks interrupts them and acknowledges that Cassidy has made a convincing case that someone has to report to the base since they lack communications. Two individuals get to stay, while the other two need to go. Hendricks will undoubtedly remain, and Cassidy has offered to do the same. Sullivan is devastated by this discovery, while Baines is delighted. Later, in a private conversation, Sullivan tries to persuade Cassidy to join them by either taking the place of Baines or defying Hendricks. Cassidy yells at him and tells him she doesn't love him. She merely sees him as a necessary part of being a human. He is so determined to make her happy that he even offers to take her place or stay here with her. Cassidy starts crying as a distraught Sullivan rushes out of the room. Sullivan and Baines focus on packing that evening. Hendricks hands Sullivan a letter to deliver to the base and remarks on how similar the enemy is to them and that both are warriors looking to defend their homes. Hendricks still refuses when Sullivan points out that they may all go together since someone needs to keep an eye on the explosion. The relief ship has purposefully headed away from the Sentinel, which is absurd, Hendricks discovers when he returns to continue working on the map and the coordinates. Hendricks runs to check on Cassidy as he starts to get worried, but he is afraid to speak. The squad is alerted the next morning that another ship has arrived on the radar by the alarm blaring. Cassidy tries unsuccessfully to contact the ship as the troops rush to take up their positions to protect the Sentinel. Hendricks orders the crew to fire, but their first shot misses. This time, he refuses to send anybody. Cassidy sees their ship is missing as they prepare to reload, just as Sullivan and Baines are able to plainly see it once the fog clears. Although they continue to hesitate to fire, Hendricks pulls his rifle and shoots Baines before Cassidy can stop him. Hendricks pushed the ship back out last night, and he shoots the air dancer to show he's serious. Baines continues to refuse to blow up the ship, and Hendricks replies by shooting himself in the ear. As a result, Sullivan grabs the cannon and blows up the ship without losing any lives. Furious Baines tries to attack Hendricks, but Cassidy uses a fire extinguisher to put him out first. After that, Hendricks is imprisoned in the pantry by Sullivan and Cassidy receives both keys back. Later, an enraged Baines seeks out Hendricks to murder him and hits Sullivan when the latter attempts to stop him. Even though Cassidy comforts him with words, Baines still departs to unpack his belongings and get drunk alone, which causes him to cry. Later, Cassidy adds that Hendricks needs to take his iodine bath, but Baines won't allow him leave and says he's quitting. When Sullivan informs Cassidy that their only option is to try every telegraph route until one is operational, Cassidy seizes the opportunity to admit she didn't mean what she said about him. She only wanted him to go without worrying about her, but Sullivan is hard to accept that as an explanation. Later on in the day, Sullivan brings some lunch to Hendricks and him why he decided against going. Hendricks relays the information he learned from the coordinates. The rescue ship was meant to have arrived 3 months ago, but something caused it to depart. This indicates that one of them is a traitor and desires the explosion. Sullivan exits after disbelieving him and relocking the door. Baines starts drinking and attempts to keep himself occupied in his workshop, but he quickly loses his mind and ruins everything he's constructed while Sullivan spends the rest of the day sending SOS signals to every channel. Later that night, Cassidy shows Sullivan a photo of herself as a young child with her family and explains that they were slain by the enemy while she was still a little child. The following morning, Baines discovers Cassidy dozing in the communications room. He assaults Cassidy while babbling crap about a lost future, acting as though he intends to take advantage of her. Cassidy struggles with him, but eventually manages to shove him away without realizing Baines has taken the keys. Cassidy then seeks out Sullivan to inform him what occurred, but just then, Baines' voice can be heard over the speaker's warning that he will detonate the device. Back in the communications room, Sullivan and Cassidy attempt to calm him down by bringing up his family as a motivation to live. Baines sobs as he removes his hands from the wheel, but when Cassidy returns the keys, Baines says he just forgot the activation code's last digit. Sullivan believes that Hendricks should be released, but Baines has disturbing news. Earlier, when he tried to murder him, Hendricks had already left the pantry. He had ended things for himself, as shown by the window being open. Cassidy and Sullivan are shocked to discover Baines told the truth when they check the pantry. Reading the letter Hendricks had sent to the base out of desperation, Sullivan is horrified to see that Hendricks had asked for his command to be prolonged. Cassidy then shows Sullivan the freshly cleaned workshop to demonstrate to him that Baines is feeling better and has resumed constructing. When Baines admits his wife was expecting a child but he never got to see the child, Sullivan is quick to pardon him for his drunken outburst. Before boarding the boat to return to recovering items from the water, Baines expresses his thanks with a hug. Since Cassidy is accompanying him, Sullivan lends her a pistol just in case. Cassidy gives him a kiss of appreciation. A short while later, Sullivan makes the decision to go fishing once more. When he pulls out the net, he finds Hendricks dead with a wound on his head, indicating that someone killed him and that there is in fact a traitor with them. Cassidy studies Baines in the boat as Sullivan sprints to check his friends' profiles for information while formulating a strategy. After checking Hendricks' map, Sullivan develops a notion. Sullivan examines the beacon outdoors as a storm approaches and finds that it can be detachable and relocated. The explanation for the coordinates is that someone removed the beacon from the boat and forced the ship to follow them rather than head to the Sentinel. The rescue personnel was then murdered, and the ship was allowed to drift away. Only Cassidy returns from the little excursion a few hours later with the news that Baines accidentally fell and died while attempting to collect some plastic. Sullivan knows right away that she killed him and was the traitor all along, but he is still too afraid to say anything. The following morning, Cassidy awakens in bed by herself. Sullivan only communicates with her via the walkie-talkie, telling her that despite the fact that he knows she killed everyone and is a spy for the enemy, he won't allow her have the bomb. Sullivan is in the process of detonating the bomb when Cassidy realizes she's lost the keys and rushes to the communications room to locate him. He doesn't mind detonating the Sentinel while they are still inside because they have no future. Cassidy tries to explain that people in her own country are suffering and that she hates lying to him as Sullivan is holding her at gunpoint, but Sullivan doesn't believe her and detonates the device. They learn Baines altered the explosive so no one can use it for devastation when the machine instead of bursting shows a witty phrase he liked to repeat. Sullivan and Cassidy finally engage in a brief conversation. They resolve to guard the Sentinel together and continue to survive no matter whatever side of the conflict shows up.